Welcome everybody to Friday afternoon at Dulwich Centre and technically Wednesday morning at Matlock in the United Kingdom where I am. I'm Hugh Fox and I have a background in social work and then child and adolescent mental health services in our National Health Service here, and currently I'm a director of the Institute of Narrative Therapy here in the UK, which a number of us have set up to try and further narrative in the UK. I'm going to be talking today about supervision. I've been involved as a person providing supervision for many years, and I guess I first started being a supervisor when I took social work students sometime back in the 1970s. I think then we just thought, you did what came naturally. And I guess that back then I thought that supervision probably was a forum for problem solving, the problems that people brought to me. I got involved in narrative ideas in the late 80s. At first I was really just enthusiastic about using it in my therapeutic practice. But after a while I began to wonder what a narrative supervision might look like, how narrative ideas might influence how I did supervision. Sometime, I guess in the late 90s, I set up. I was part of a small supervision group, which I set up, and as I recall, initially the first group we just shared accounts of our work and thought together about how we might use narrative ideas in relation to this work. But subsequently I ran another supervision group, and I thought that I would do this slightly differently, and that I would structure it using outsider witness and definitional ceremony. It seemed to me that this might be a forum where I could use these ideas, and this might make the process of what we were doing more narrative. And the setup basically was that we'd invite somebody to bring a piece of recording of some work they'd done, and then we'd listen to it, and then somebody would interview the person about the work, whilst other people in the group would listen as outsider witnesses, and then there would be outsider witness responses, just how you'd normally do outsider witnessing, really. And I remember being pretty anxious that this idea, well, it might lead to the rich description of the lives of the people who were being worked with, not the people in the supervision group, but the people with whom they were working. I thought it might contribute little to the workers' sense of how to go on with the work. It was with some relief that it turned out that actually the workers seemed to find this process very helpful, to be able to hear the responses of the outsider witnesses. This surprised me, but it did seem to be helpful. Another feature of this group that's worth mentioning is that we tape recorded both the interview of the worker and the outsider witness responses, and the re-interviewing of the worker after the outsider witness responses. And then the worker would take this tape recording back to the person they were working with, so that they could listen to it together and talk about it, and the person who was being worked with, the person at the centre of all this, could have a copy of the tape. And this proved to be a really fruitful practice. The people who got the tapes back always seemed to find they made a real contribution to their lives. And so I hadn't really thought of it this way, but it turned out that people, workers who were working in an isolated setting and didn't have people, fellow professionals they could use as outsider witnesses, could recruit people from our group as outsider witnesses, and so there could be an outsider witness practice for the person at the centre. I think that group only ran for a year, but it kind of influenced my ideas about what outsider and what narrative supervision might be. And I set up another group And we used the same practices. And at about the same time, I read a couple of articles in the International Journal of Narrative Therapy and Community Work. There was a 2002 issue on teaching and supervision. There was an article in there by John Winslade, where he proposed the possibility that counsellor education could be viewed as a process of storying of professional identity. And there was another article by Gershoni and Kramer, where they described training and supervision as the use of narrative ideas in building upon students' preferred stories of being a therapist. Well, I hadn't had these ideas before, but I thought, oh yes, of course. We've got our outsider witnesses, and in the supervision group, so far they've been reflecting on the identities of the person at the centre, the person who's being worked with by the worker. But I realised when I read these articles that the outsider witnesses could also reflect upon the preferred identity of the worker, the person in the supervision group. And so there were at least two possibilities for rich description here. Rich description of the life of the person at the centre, and rich description of the life of the worker, the professional life of the worker. And when I thought about it a bit more, I realised that there were other possibilities. So it was also possible, for instance, for the outsider witnesses to reflect upon the relationship between the worker and the person at the centre. And that another way to think about that would be to think about the identity of the work itself that was going on, how this work could be described. And I found these ideas very, very useful. And as I say, not only in group supervision, but in individual supervision, for me to think about what a supervision might be in narrative. And it led me to making a shift from seeing supervision as problem solving to seeing supervision as a forum for rich description. And as I say, it could be rich description of the life of the person at the centre, rich description of the worker's identity, rich description of the identity of the work itself. So for instance, when people come to me and say, oh, this work is going nowhere, we're stuck, it's possible actually to look for, to understand this as a problematic account of the work, and to look for unique outcomes, and to build alternative meanings, and to richly describe preferred accounts of the work, that the work might be going somewhere rather than stuck, that actually there may be progress, that maybe the person at the centre is valuing this work, and to think about why this work might be valued. So that would be kind of like rich description of the work itself. The more I thought about this, the more I realised there were other possibilities. So for instance, we could have rich description of the team within which the worker worked, or even of the agency within which they worked. And I suspect that the subjects for rich description in supervision are limited only by the imagination of the supervisor, and there might be many, many other areas which could be richly described. Another kind of area that I wondered about in thinking about supervision as a narrative process was something about whether it would be possible to use the various maps of narrative practice to structure conversations in supervision. And of course, it turns out this is possible, and I find this often happens. But to do this, I found that it was useful to think about two different kinds of questions that I might ask the supervisee, the person being supervised. So the first kind of question I kind of call experience questions. It's only so we can talk about it. It's not an expression I use a lot. But an experience question would be where I say to the supervisor, a supervisee, something like, tell me, in your conversations with Mary, have you come up with a name for this difficulty? And I'm asking them to tell me about what their experience is of what has happened in their work with Mary. Surprisingly, quite often when I ask these questions, I find that the worker hasn't come up with a naming. And so then I resort to what I think of as the second type of question, which I refer to as an imagination question. I invoke their imagination. So I say something like, well, suppose you were to ask Mary what she might call this problem. What kind of ideas have you got about what kind of names she might come up for this problem? And then it becomes possible to ask questions like, if you and Mary were to name the problem in this way, what kind of conversations do you think you could have that you can't have currently because the problem isn't named in this way? And then it becomes possible in talking about the work to start to use some of the maps of narrative practice. So I might, for instance, use a statement of position map 1 to guide some of my questions. So I might say, well, if you were to name the problem this way, how do you think, what do you think Mary might say about how this problem is affecting her life and the influence it's having on her life? So I can kind of talk about the work through a statement of position map 1, or I might be using a similar map to talk about Mary's life using a statement of position map 1, or I might use a similar map to talk about the work. So I might say, if you named it this way, what effect would that have on your work with Mary, do you think? This is also looking at an effect. In this case, it's more like a statement of position map 2, because I suppose you could say that naming the problem was an initiative which enabled other things to happen. And I can pursue maps of narrative practice in this way, thinking both about the life of the person at the centre, in this case, the example I'm giving Mary, or indeed about the work. So I've found that I can use all sorts of maps. I can use these maps, of course, in storying the professional identity of the worker as well. And I often find myself asking questions which are about their identity. So I might say, when somebody says, oh, I've come with this issue and I don't know what to do about it, I ask questions like, well, could you tell me about times before in the past when you've met this issue and you feel like you've dealt with it more successfully? Could you tell me about the sorts of things that you've done to deal with it? Could you tell me about your intentions in doing those things and why that might be important to you? And we start to get on to a rich description of the worker's preferred identity as a worker, and maybe we can name this. And then I can say, well, if you were to remember about these things that are important to you, and if you were to hold on to this account of yourself that we've just named, how would that guide how you would go forward in the current context? And so I can use narrative practices to help workers not only restory themselves, but by embracing that restorying, to think about how to go forward with their work. And of course, in this context, I might have all sorts of conversations with them. I could have reauthoring conversations, I could have remembering conversations. I can just generally use maps of narrative practice, and this can lead to really rich narrative supervisions, which are quite different from the kind of problem-solving supervisions that used to be my predominant way of working. And I don't wish to suggest that the only supervision I do are these wonderful narrative conversations. Quite often it seems to me that I've got thoughts and ideas in my head based upon my experience, which the other person might not have. And I might say, would they be interested to know what I'm thinking and share my thoughts? And of course, I do the thing that I guess we all do in supervision. When somebody says, what should I do about? My first question is always that standard one, well, what are your ideas? And it's surprising how often people then come up with ideas, and it turns out they don't need my help at all. They just need to think about their own thoughts. So I don't mean to say that we always have these wonderful narrative conversations, but I can certainly say that the flavour of my supervisions has changed over the years. I suppose I try to bring exactly the same principles to supervision as I do to therapy. And so some of these principles might be quite simple, separating the person from the problem, and that's whether this is the worker or the person consulting with them. You know, maintaining an externalized way of speaking and stepping away from totalizing descriptions of either the worker or the person at the center. So that's a simple principle. Centering the worker in the conversation and decentering myself, just like I try to center people who come to me for therapy, I try to center the worker in the conversation and decenter myself. I'm not saying that I'm always successful in that, but that's one of the principles I work to. And just as in therapy, opening space for the telling of people's experience rather than closing space down. It's about giving opportunities rather than constraining. And taking a position that is curious and in relation to the experience of others, and that avoids expertise on the lives and problems of both the people at the centre, who the supervisee is working with, and also on the life and practice of the supervisee. And finally, I suppose transparency, being open about what I'm doing. I try to, in my therapeutic work, be as transparent as possible, and also with people who come to me for supervision. So I think those, you know, there are obviously other narrative principles that could be spelled out, but I see no reason why the same principles shouldn't apply. I don't think that therapy and supervision are the same thing. I think they are different things. But it seems to me that in both, something that is kind of similar is that in both situations someone is asking for some kind of consultation about things they are dealing with in their lives, issues in their lives. So I want to position myself in an approximately similar way. Well, a couple of the differences between therapy, I think, and supervision are that in therapy people are usually coming to see me because there is some difficulty that they feel kind of like permanently stuck with. It's coming to be a real problem in their lives and spoiling their lives. People who come to me in supervision, occasionally that's the case, but it's rarely the case. They come because they think that it's ethically correct to ensure that they discuss their work with somebody and that they have somebody they share this with and they have another perspective on their work. Another difference, which I think is really important, is that the people who come to me for therapy rarely have a kind of understanding of what it is that we might do together, or they rarely understand my understanding of what we might do together. They often have an understanding, but it's often quite different from mine. You know, they often think that they will come and see me and I will tell them what to do, which isn't, of course, my understanding. And so, you know, there's all sorts of stuff that needs to be negotiated there. And in some ways, achieving transparency is more difficult in therapy than in supervision, because often, you know, I ask the question, how much would you like to know about how I work? And the responses vary enormously from, as it were, just get on with it and do it to me, to, yes, I'd really like to know about it. But very few of the people who come to me for therapy are on for a kind of 5-day course in narrative therapy. People who come to me for supervision come with some kind of model or ideas about these things. Of course, they may not have a model of supervision, but they still have a kind of model about ideas of how we work together. It may not be the same as my model, but we'll probably share a number of assumptions. I guess that's what I want to say about narrative supervision today. There might be other things I could say, but thank you very much for listening to me, and I hope you may have found some of these ideas interesting, and good luck with your own supervision. Bye.